You can't have a conversation about branding without having a conversation about a company's messaging. The two just go hand in hand. But what is messaging? Is it the tone and style of how you communicate? Is it the type of content that you put out into the market? I thought it would be helpful to dive a little deeper into this topic of brand messaging. So I turned to my friend Marnie Hayutin, who works with many companies on their messaging and on content creation. I wanted her take on how messaging is related to a company's brand. What are the signs that a company has the incorrect messaging? And I was curious to learn the tactics that she uses to get messaging right. Hello and welcome to Swaay.Health, where we bring you the latest insights and interesting stories from the brightest minds in healthcare marketing. I'm Colin Hung, and joining me today is Marnie Hayutin, founder and CEO of Writing.Health. She is going to share her thoughts on messaging. So get ready to be inspired, learn some new tricks, and take your marketing game to the next level. Let's jump right in. Marnie, welcome back to the program.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
I'm excited because, this whole month we've been talking about brand and branding. And, I know you work with a lot of clients around some of their messaging. And we're going to talk today about messaging and how that's related to brand and what you're seeing in the marketplace. So glad to have you on.
Oh, glad to be here. Thank you.
So right off the top, Marnie, let's tell me a little bit about messaging. What do you mean when we say messaging?
That's such a good question. A lot of people use the word messaging when they just mean they're going to write some new copy. Really, I think the term messaging is most effectively used when it describes a company's whole framework for communicating with customers. So it's about not just figuring out what you want to say, but also really understanding what your customers are ready to hear and when in the journey they're ready to hear it.
And Marnie, how is messaging related to a company's brand?
So that's really a good question. Messaging is a critical component of the brand, and sometimes the core of it, I think, is overlooked in branding exercises. So branding guidelines will go through logo usage and fonts, and then in terms of messaging, they'll go over voice and personality, but sometimes they don't really get that elevator pitch down. And what really, if you're working with a consultant who does branding with you, you really need to expect a messaging document, I think, to include the elevator pitch and to include the PR boilerplate, and that kind of messaging you really have to make sure you're getting down, and it has to be part of your brand.
So it's not just the persona, if you will, the characteristics you're describing, it's also the actual content that should be part of the messaging that's related to your brand.
Very much so, yes.
And Marnie, tell me, what are some of the symptoms of having wrong messaging? Like, what are some of the things that, if I was to look for some signs as a company, that maybe I have the wrong messaging?
So first you want to look for some places where you're seeing confusion in the marketplace. And one of the first places to look actually is your social media. When I work with companies on their social media, you sort of think in terms of like maybe 3 buckets of what you talk about. So for me, I do marketing, healthcare, and writing. And you want to think in terms of whatever you post on social media is 2 or 3, but never just 1. So you get really diluted messaging when you just do 1. So if I were to just post about random healthcare, that doesn't perpetuate my brand very well. It needs to have marketing and writing in there too.
I gotcha.
Also, a couple other things to be aware of is when you start to get feedback on RFPs that people are confused, that when they don't really completely understand what it is that you do. If your AdWord campaigns, they work really well and you've got a lot of traffic coming, but then you don't have conversions on your site, that could be a messaging problem.
Gotcha. And so other than those, are there other signs that it's time to redo or rethink your messaging framework?
Yeah, it's interesting. First of all, sometimes you don't have to redo your messaging. So startups in particular, they're very quick to redo messaging when it hasn't even had time to take root in the marketplace. CEOs of startups sometimes are used to being really nimble. They want to respond to the last person that they met in a sales call or the last consultant that they talked with. So sometimes you don't want to change your messaging and you want to let it have time to kind of fly out there in the world. But really it is if you're starting to see that confusion, that evidence of confusion. So I think sometimes, for example, if you get vendors who maybe they think you do telemedicine and you don't do telemedicine, we're very quick, I think, to just say that that's a person who didn't do their homework, but maybe you're saying something pretty vague on your website. And if you're just a communication platform, maybe it's reasonable that the person thought you might do telemedicine. So you might need to clarify and do a better job with your marketing messaging.
I like how you put that there, Marnie. Like we do tend to react very quickly when we're in that startup environment, right? Because as you said, we're used to being nimble, we're used to turning on a dime, but messaging and branding, they take time to percolate through the market, right? Like, so if you keep changing, you're going to be known as, well, you're not going to be well known because your brand messaging is just different every single time someone looks at you. So that's a really key point that you just made there, where you have to let it percolate for a little while before you might want to consider switching.
Absolutely.
So what is the best way to approach a new messaging framework?
So one of the things that I think is really important is one-on-one interviews with all the stakeholders. So the big brainstorming sessions are really popular, the ones with the whiteboards and the Post-it notes. And I do think that there's a definite use for that. It's wonderful team building too. But I think you need to do the one-on-one interviews. Groupthink really is an issue. It does sometimes lead you to stick with messaging just because everybody's used to it, rather than it being really valuable. So I think that's one thing you need to do, is get those one-on-one interviews to really let people have a free space to speak their mind. And one other thing though too is I find that find your why is advice that we've been using a lot and hearing a lot. I think some of us have gone a little too far on that, so that a lot of our websites say we improve patient care. So you want to make sure that you haven't gone so far down that your value is too big.
Right. We've all read and appreciate Simon Sinek, but perhaps we've gone a little bit too far into the why and come up with a bland one, right? Where it was just mom and apple pie, right?
Yes. Make sure your why actually says the thing that you address.
Right. And in a unique way, right? We of course, we all want to improve healthcare. We all want better patient outcomes, but say it in a different way, because if you just say that, people are like, yeah, of course. Well, I want that too. Right.
Yeah, exactly. So, yes, we do want to improve patient care. Where I think you might see that, for example, is with if you say something like, we want to remove friction in the patient experience. Well, are you a portal? Are you a communication platform? Are you an RCM, revenue cycle platform? You want to make sure that, yes, that is what you do, but have you gotten so vague that we can't even tell exactly what your product is?
Right. And that's a problem, especially when you're trying to make a name for yourself in a market as large as healthcare. If you're not specific, then people are just going to assume you're a telehealth company when in fact you're a patient engagement company, or worse, they'll just ignore you because they're just like, I haven't got time to figure out what you do, and I'm not going to spend 20 minutes trying to figure that out on your website.
Yeah, exactly. We don't want to make it hard for them.
So, in your travels, Marnie, you work with a lot of clients, a lot of healthcare IT companies, healthcare companies. What are some of the bigger mistakes that clients make with their messaging?
One of the biggest mistakes that I've seen, I think clients think that messaging and the process of putting your messaging together is all about deciding what's in and what's out. And that's where you see them kind of hanging on to phrases. They'll fight to the death to hang on to a phrase that they really, really like because they're fighting to keep them in. But actually, it's really not about in and out. It's about putting the information in the right order. You can use it all. It just has to be in the order that makes it easy to understand.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. So what you're saying, that order is also important, not just the content. So like for our audience, can you explain what happens when you get information or messaging presented in the wrong order?
This reminds me of that old elementary school task that I think we've all done this, the how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. So remember back to those days when we forgot to say, open the jar. We forgot to say, take a knife and use it to spread the peanut butter. It's the same with our marketing. So what I really see, I see a lot of people, they want to throw their features and benefits at you without you having that anchoring knowledge of what they are. So it's like, take a car, for example. They want to tell you about their leather seats. They want to tell you about their navigation, but they haven't said, are you a bus? Are you a car? Are you an airplane? And without that, I have no idea what your features are even talking about.
It's funny, that exercise, you reminded me of when I first went through that, the whole peanut butter and I'd never had it before, right?
Oh,
I'd
no.
never had peanut butter and jelly before. I didn't know what the process was. And I remember running home and asking my parents, like, can I have one of these things? And we made it. And I was like, what have I been missing? Like, I have been missing out on peanut butter and jelly. That's a distinct childhood memory. So thank you for that. But Marnie, let's say, for example, off the top, you said, you may not have to redo your entire messaging. That might not be the best step forward. But if you're not ready for that complete message overhaul, what's your advice in terms of starting with something maybe smaller?
What I would do is I would look at your assets and look for places where you're being a little vague. Look for places where you are saying things that are technically correct, like improving mental health with technology. Well, that's right. But that's also like saying your Audi Q5 is a transportation platform. You can do better than that. So there are a lot of places where you've gotten attached to phrases and things, but you could actually be much more specific with them. So that's a really great place to start.
Yeah, and I really like the advice you gave earlier around just look for spots of confusion, right? And if you're finding that feedback where people are kind of, when they initially meet you, like, and they make the wrong assumption of what you are, that could be a sign. And then maybe that's something you can tighten up without having to revamp your entire messaging platform.
And the confusion happens, it happens at the asset level with sentences, so you can fix things there, but also across the whole patient journey. So, I remember being with my team on the show floor and the question from someone who knew nothing about what we did, hey, what do you guys do? And the answer was, we just added scheduling. So it's making sure that you're answering the right question, that you're really paying attention to what it is that they're ready to hear.
Yeah, that's being too much on brand or too much following the marketing department. Say, well, the number one goal of this conference is we got to tell them about our scheduling app. But if someone comes up and says, hey, what do you do? That may not be your first answer. And to your early point, you're not presenting the information, their messaging in the right order.
Yes, exactly. So map it to the journey. So map your assets to the journey. What are the things, when they're at the, hey, what do you guys do phase? These are the assets and this is the information they get. When they're down to, hey, does your product do this? It's an entirely different set of assets.
Marnie, you shared a lot of wonderful information here, lots of value packed into this short time we've had together. Where can people go to find more information about you and your company?
Oh, thank you so much. So my company is Writing.Health, and that is also my web address. So please visit.
Awesome. Marnie, always a pleasure to have you on the program. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. It was great to be here. Thank you for a great conversation.
I want to thank Marnie for spending time with us today and for sharing her thoughts on branding and messaging. My key takeaway from the conversation was that messaging is more than how you say what you say and what you want to say. Marnie really highlighted for me that when you say something is just as important. Delivering the right message in the right tone at the right time is what you want, not just 2 out of 3. And hey, if you enjoyed this interview as much as I did, please like and subscribe. Also, head on over to Swaay.Health. That's Swaay with 2 A's, .health. That's where you'll find more great content like this. I'm Colin Hung. Thanks for being here, and I'll catch you on the next video.